This is the third week of this summer that we're looking at the story of Jonah. And of course, it's a story that we all know. And I was kidding around with some of the ladies earlier this morning. I just found out, apparently Jonah gets swallowed by a fish. I had no idea. No, actually, this is the most well-known part of the whole thing, is in verse 17. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Now, I heard the question already this morning, and people really want to know, did this really happen? Well, let me show you what Jesus says about it in Matthew chapter 12, verse 40. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. So it looks like, just, looking at this on the surface, it looks to me like the one who knows all of history innately and intimately and personally thought that this story about Jonah was an actual historical story, that it actually happened. So I don't know, just maybe that might be indicative to us that we should too. Just a thought. I mean, if you ask, how can a man survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days? The answer is, he probably can't. And that's the whole point. He can't survive in the belly of a fish for 3 days any more than a person can survive dead for 3 days and come back to life. That's why Jesus called it a sign there. Jesus knew that Jonah's swallowing by a fish was not an ordinary event. It was a miraculous sign of God's gracious and powerful intervention. There's no point in trying to explain it scientifically any more than you would try to explain any of Jesus' miracles, and especially his own resurrection. You can't. It's miraculous. But really, honestly, I'm not going to go any further on that because the pursuit of that line of reasoning is a distraction from the point. The focus of the story isn't the fish. The focus of the story is the nature of God. And what is being revealed is that God responds to Jonah's rebellion with mercy and grace. And Jonah did nothing to earn it. That's how we know it's grace. See, grace and mercy are given, not earned. God overcomes all of our attitudes, all of our perceptions, all of our willfulness through mercy and grace. That's really the essence of the gospel. And this idea is set then in stark contrast to what we've seen about Jonah. Jonah, who is relating to God out of his own religious heritage, based on what he, Jonah, does or does not do. Which means that the whole story is to show us how God, through mercy and grace, moves within humanity to mold and shape real people into a people after his own heart. And what he needs from them is for them to simply yield to his movement in their lives. Now, Jonah lived 700 years before Paul. But Romans 8:28 has a lot to do with what we see going on in Jonah's life. You've heard this verse, even if you don't know the reference to it. It says this, "And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose." Now here's the problem that we have with this verse. We take this verse and say, well, that verse says only good things will happen to me if I love God. But that is not what that verse says. It says all things work together for good. Not that all things that happen to me will be perceived by me as good. It can take a long time for us to understand that God has a much better understanding of good than you or I will ever have, him being infinite. And what Jonah's experience shows us is that God will allow a significant amount of difficulty in a person's life, in order to accomplish the good that you and I are so eager to skip ahead to. But we can't just scene skip over the stuff we don't like to get to the things we like in our own personal movie. What we have to understand is that knowing Jonah's heart, knowing his hatred of the Assyrians, knowing his idolatry of his own race, knowing all of that, God called Jonah to do something that would directly confront everything that is in Jonah's heart, everything that Jonah placed first in his own life, which means that God knew that Jonah would initially fail at everything God called him to. Now, if you've grown up being taught that God wants to bless you and that you need to just simply step into that blessing, what I just said is a really tough concept for you to swallow. But God's idea of what is a blessing for you is not necessarily something that you find comfortable or pleasant for you. Sometimes it demands that you experience in real time the nature and character of God. You see, God didn't call Jonah to fail. God is ultimately setting him up for success. But to get there, to get to that success, Jonah has to experience what we're seeing today in this story. Because God knew that Jonah would not be any good at what he was calling Jonah to do until he failed at it utterly. And now Jonah is about to hit rock bottom. All these things, the running, the storm, the time in the fish, these are all being worked out for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose. See, Jonah needed to fail, and until Jonah failed and saw how weak he was, how foolish he was, until he saw how dependent a creature he was upon God, and how totally reliant that he was on God, until he saw all of the idols that he had in his life, his racial superiority, his spiritual pride, until he saw all of those things that were driving his life, until he saw that he was not competent to speak grace and mercy and how they relate to a person's personal sin, he couldn't ever be competent in his calling. So quite often, the only way God can come into a life is to do the same thing the friends of an alcoholic have to do. They have to intervene. You have to say to your friend, you are not in control of your life. You need help. Admit your weakness. Own that it's a problem and that you need help, or you are going to die. And we don't want that for you. And that's exactly what every single one of us needs spiritually. We need that intervention from God. You're going to have to go through what he intends for you to go